We got the short table today.
Yeah, we did.
Short 2 council members today.
Okay.
Before the roll call or after?
No, after roll
Yes,
call.
after roll call. Yeah, that's fine.
Gotcha. I will present it.
Good evening, everybody, and we will call the meeting to order. Welcome to the City Council study session for June 11th, 2018. Danny, would you call the roll, please?
Deputy Mayor Beckett.
Here.
Councilmember Brown.
Excused.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Here.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Pelosa.
Here.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Excused.
And Councilmember Wynn.
Here.
The first order of business is we will have a brief executive session here at the beginning of the meeting, so we will go into recess until the conclusion of the executive session.
What is the topic? It's pending or potential litigation. We would ask for 10 minutes and ask that we be joined by Director Gaub and Manager Barber. No action is expected to be taken. Man, I get myself into trouble enough as it is, just push it. All right, thank you, Mr. Gordon. Whoa. spot here.
We will now reconvene the meeting. Thank you for your patience. Don't believe there's any announcements or reports. First item on the agenda is item 3A, which is the utility rate study presentation by Director Coleman.
Right, well, actually, I'm just going to sit up here and give face. But we have Angie and Sergey are back
The more
with
the
us this
merrier.
evening to go over some rate options with you.
We have a supplementary handout that goes along with the presentation. Yeah, there's an extra one.
Gotcha, thank you.
There's just some bill impacts for each city.
Okay.
Want me to just take it away? Sure. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us back. Back in April, on the 23rd, we were before you initially and presented some of the initial results for the water, sewer, stormwater utility rate study. And so we are back again, kind of with the next step this evening, really trying to focus on more of the rate design. So previously, we really focused on what are the overall revenue needs of each utility, what does the cost of service look like in terms of evaluating customer classes within that utility and the equity for serving those particular customer classes. And so now what we're back with this evening is more of the rate design. So now that we've identified what that target revenue collection is, how do we then begin to charge our customers? What do those rates look like? You know, how much is in the fixed charge, how much is in the variable charge, and what might that look like by customer class? And so that's what we'll be presenting this evening, along with some bill impacts, and that's what Sergey has just handed out right now, is some of the bill impacts for each of those particular alternatives that we're bringing forward. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about what the next steps may be and where we are in the study process. And so just a quick recap, what we had presented during the April meeting was that when we evaluated each of the overall needs of the water, sewer, and storm utility, it did appear that each of the utilities needed some level of rate increase. And so the water was looking at about a 3.4% increase for the 4-year time period annually, sewer about 2.4%, and then stormwater about 1.7%. So we're around the inflationary ranges in terms of what we're looking at for each of the utilities and their overall needs. And so as we move forward, when we talk about rate design, these are the rate increases that we're looking at. And so when we present a rate design, the overall objective is to generate 3.4% for water, 2.4% for sewer, and then 1.7% for stormwater. So each alternative that we present the intent is to target that level of revenue generation. Okay?
Now, is that the average, or is that 3.4% for next year and then 3.4 on top of the previous
Yes.
3.4?
Correct. So it's annual, 3.4% increase for each of the years. Okay? And so then I'm going to dive right into, go ahead.
Councilmember Pelosi has a question.
Sorry, I'm confused at this chart. And of course, you made it more confusing for me. So when you asked the question, 3.4 for next year, and then I thought we were going to continue 3.4 for 2020.
Correct. Another 3.4%.
But it's cumulative.
It is.
Right.
So I would have thought a chart like this would be more dynamic if you showed us.
Oh, the addition, the cumulative.
Yeah. I mean, I would have picked it up right away, but this chart didn't tell me that.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
Appreciate
you.
that feedback. We'll can incorporate that for sure. Okay. So as we dive into the rate designs for each of the utilities, we're going to take sewer first. And again, this is more of a recap. It's the sewer cost of service results. And when we looked at the major customer categories of the sewer utility, that was single family and non-single family. with the black line being at cost of service. And so what we showed last time versus this time, and again, we've been able to make some adjustments so it actually narrowed the gap in terms of what we're seeing for cost of service. But it did look like the single-family customer was slightly overpaying in terms of their cost of service, and non-single-family customers were underpaying in terms of trying to meet their cost of service. Now, the overall direction was ideally, and past history, is that the city would like to ultimately get that each customer class is paying their cost of service. And so that was kind of what we had taken from that particular conversation during the last presentation and move forward with the rate designs, with the understanding that we're not trying to get there immediately year one. We're going to try to phase that in over time in terms of the time period that we're looking at. Okay. So again, just really quick summary in terms of the rate design that you'll see in the next slide. So one proposed rate structure change in terms of what you have today. We want to fix the inequities by moving rates towards cost of service, and we wanted to achieve, hopefully, full cost of service by 2022. And so that's the intent of the rate structure that you'll see in the next slide. And so for that particular table, essentially at the very top, what you're going to see is in order to get to cost of service for that particular customer class, you'll see the single-family customer is about 1.1% increase in every year, except for the final year, is about 1%. And then the non-single family, because they're below their cost of service, actually needs a little bit more than the average. So if the overall average is 2.4%, single family is less than the overall average, non-single family is higher, again, trying to get back to that cost of service overall by the year 2022. And so those are the overall even increases that we would need in order to do that. Now the table down below is showing the very, kind of shows the customer class that we're talking about. So single family first, dollars per month. The existing rate's $24.89, and so again, applying those particular overall increases, you can see how that rate would change over time in terms of 2019 through 2022.
Councilmember Wales.
Now, but people that are on septic don't have to pay this.
Right, they're not a city customer.
Okay. And what is the King County treatment charge generally?
Do we have that?
It's around $42 right now. I can double check 1 second.
$42 a month?
About 44-ish, 44, 45. It's a significant portion. So this is just the local charge. This is kind of what we can kind of control, and then we pass on the King County charge, essentially what they charge us. And so the bill comparison on this next page gives you the total with King County plus local. But overall, you can see that single family rate for 2019 through 2022, the monthly impact is about 27 to 28 cents per month in terms of the 1.1% increase on that overall bill for the local charge. Again, non-single family is slightly different because it does have a fixed charge as well as a volume charge. And if you go over 7,500 cubic feet, that's when that volume charge kicks in. So you kind of get some allowance kind of in there in that base charge and not charged until you get over that amount.
Angie, your cost of service charges, do they include both just the cost of the service, or do they also include infrastructure and all things related to that?
All things related to the utility. So we're looking at operating, maintenance, capital, debt service requirements, and also fiscal policy. So there's certain fiscal policies, reserve levels, debt service coverage that we need to meet. So we are looking at the holistic system needs, for sure.
And I think that's important for the people who are watching on TV, just to make sure they understand that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And so the handout that we have provided essentially is going to kind of, Sergey will kind of run you through what that looks like and what it means.
Yeah, if you take a look at the first page of the rate design impacts handout, what we wanted to do is kind of provide you with some little bit more detail in terms of impacts, how different customer groups can, or different users will be impacted. Again, this is for you to reference at any time that you choose. But if you look at page 1, here we summarize the sewer impacts. We have a separate table at the top, that shows the impacts for single-family customers, again, because every single-family customer is one account. There's not really a range of different impacts. Everybody will get impacted the same. So what you're looking at here is a comparison of actual monthly bills for the future periods, starting 2018 with existing rates of $24.89. As we apply those increases, we get up to about $25.99 by year 2022. The middle table shows you kind of the monthly increases per year. So with the monthly difference, about 28 cents per month per year on average. And then the far right table shows you the average percentage increase. So the lower table shows you the impacts on non-residential customers. As Angie mentioned, those customers actually have a volume charge. So as soon as they exceed 7.5 CCF on a monthly basis, they'll start paying per unit. So here you'll notice that we listed several usage levels. We looked at the average consumption was about 45 for this class, 45 CCF per month. We looked at a lower usage consumption level for this class, about half of that, 20 CCF per month. And then we wanted to look at the top 10% new users, took an average of that. That's approximately 400 CCF, kind of on the higher end users who are part of this class. So you can see proportionately the increase is about equal to the overall class average in terms of percentages, and then the dollars are representative of the overall level of their usage.
Councilmember Wheels.
So, if I live in a duplex, I would pay the non-single family low.
Depends.
It depends how much they use. So in this example, we're using 20 CCF, but a duplex might not be using that much water. They might stay within the allowance of 7.5.
Oh, okay, and so this is, so it's their cumulative use, not, they wouldn't be charged $75 for each half of the duplex.
I can double check that, but I believe so, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
It depends on whether they have one water meter
Right.
serving or 2 water meters. If they're individually metered,
Then they
they're
would-
going to each be treated as
Yeah.
single family.
Okay, got it.
Okay. A little bit of. And so the next slide there on the PowerPoint, I just wanted to provide you with a bill comparison in terms of what the single family impact would be. That does represent the majority of your customers in terms of accounts. And so what you can see there is in the kind of the brownish orange bars is essentially the lower one is where you are today, the existing rate, and you kind of tick up one little mark so you don't really necessarily move or, up over another entity. And so the 2019 rate is essentially stating that you wouldn't move too far. You're still kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of the bill comparisons for the sewer.
And what's important to remember is that those are, for all other entities, it's in 2018 rates for them, so they're most likely, a lot of them will have rate adjustments as well.
So it's current rates for everybody else, and we're just kind of showing you what that 2019 rate would look like for you all in terms of the city. And so that's the sewer utility. Moving on to the stormwater utility. Again, just go ahead.
Councilmember Pelosi.
So, as a consultant, so we just saw the sewer. So what is your assumptions? Is the city of Auburn not getting paid enough to take care of the sewer costs for the infrastructure, all this? What is your take on that?
So we are trying to phase in a certain level of depreciation funding in terms of, your overall needs. So we look at capital. So we look at your capital plan for the 20-year time period and really what are your overall annual needs, and over time say, well, what is the most optimal in terms of funding for that capital? And so some's going to be rates, and then some is going to be maybe some debt service. I don't think sewer is taking debt on because you have funds available. And so we're looking at all of the holistic needs that we have of the utility, but also trying to balance out the rate impact. And so we are looking at capital and some level of system infrastructure funding for capital and ensuring that we're balancing everything out. And so you are funding a certain level of system reinvestment, what we call it, from rates with the existing charges that you have.
So, so this raw data has not been filtered out for a recommendation from your group?
The recommendation is working with staff as well as, again,
No,
looking
but
at
what
the
I mean
expertise.
is-
Uh-huh.
This does not give us a recommendation, this raw data, to the council. It's just data.
It's just data.
And so when will we see some recommendation from your group?
So the overall increase, the recommendation to meet your needs would be what we showed you, the 3.4, the 1.7.
So increases
Yes.
to bring us up to where we are not supplementing water.
They are standalone
I
utilities.
tweet your eyeballs in.
They're standalone and
Yeah.
they don't subsidize one another. They're standalone utilities.
Yeah, but according to this one chart, it reflects the 3.4, that we've got to continue these, what I call large increases up to 2022 in order to cover all of our costs. Right now, we're not recovering all of our costs. That's the way I look at it. Am I wrong in that?
Okay, we do need to increase rates. We have increasing demands with labor costs and contracts, the staffing. We have debt service coverage we need to make. These are rates, these increases are necessary to maintain the utility in the fashion that we have held out to our bondholders, that we will maintain the utility, we'll have debt service coverage, and so we can make our debt service payments. And to meet, as Angie said, we're taking some rate for depreciation, which means down the road, we won't have to issue debt to do all of our system repair and replacement. We'll have cash on hand to do it. So it's a mixture. We have a policy that will leverage, I think it's about 50-50, that will do 50% cash, 50% debt. And so this will give us the cash. So we're not just doing debt, but we do have debt service payments existing right now. And these are funds needed to comply with our bond covenants and to maintain our services as they are.
Thank you, Shelley.
Councilmember Wales.
Okay, so what is King County Metro planning on doing over the next 4 years?
Typically, they do an increase every other year, so they stagger their increases, and they do have some increases planned.
So the ones we know about, we have included them in
Okay,
here.
great. And when we look at the one that you have for 2019, the $69.39, that does include the
Metro.
$45 for Metro.
Whatever their costs are
Okay, okay, great.
for that particular unit
It's
for
not over
providing
and
the
above.
service. Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay. So we'll go to the stormwater utility. And again, just a quick recap, of what we had presented during the last presentation, is that some of the utilities, again, those being above the black line there, are paying more than their cost of service. And then the farther, 4 kind of towards the right-hand side, really including those that we're providing a lot of credits for, are underpaying. So essentially, it's likely that we are providing a higher credit than actually is cost justifiable in terms of those particular facilities and retention and detention facilities. And so trying to get them to their cost of service, we do need to increase their particular rates to get them closer to that black line. So some are above, some are below, and so again, trying to reconcile that. Now here, it's a little bit wordy on this particular slide here. We did come back with 2 options for stormwater that we'll want to discuss and get your direction and thoughts on here. The first one that we'll present is we're calling the cost of service rate. So as the other utilities, we are trying to get to the full cost of service by 2022. We wanted to fix some of the inequities by reducing the size of the non-single family rate credits. So as you saw in the graphic, some of those increases do have to, or some of those rates, have to go up in order to meet the full cost of service that we have projected in the study. You currently have 2 rates right now for stormwater. You have a base rate as well as an equivalent service unit rate. And so the recommendation is to combine those 2 rates just so we have one stormwater rate. You still have the same customer classes, retention, detention, etc. But instead of having 2 rates, you're going to have one rate, one per equivalent service unit rate. It does look like, in terms of that first option, that we could reduce the rate for the single-family customers, but obviously the other classes would have to go up to meet their cost of service. And so we do have to be careful with the large impacts that some non-single-family customers would have. But again, this is kind of what the cost of service has identified for us. And so not a lot of structure changes for that first option. We're going to keep all of the customer classes that you currently have today with stormwater, but we're going to combine the charges. So no base charge plus the ESU charge is one charge. Now okay.
Councilmember Wales.
Now, people that are on septic, they do not pay water, sewer. They don't pay sewer, but they do pay stormwater. So we have a broader base that we provide service to. Okay, just want to make sure I understood.
On the option 2, it is slightly different. So in this particular option, we move toward a single rate based on amount of impervious area. So again, similar to, you know, what we're trying to do is kind of condense those two charges. But we also want to simplify some of those customer classes. So right now you have quite an extensive level of detail of your customer classes, which is great because you're trying to recognize the fact that some of these particular customers actually did provide on-site detention and retention facilities. And so this particular option is trying to simplify. So over time, you'll eventually get to one point in 2023 where we have it where everybody will be paying the same ESU rate. Okay, so right now it's different by credit type. And so in this particular option, the biggest change really is that you would be converting to one rate as well as everybody paying that single ESU rate.
Councilmember
So essentially
Pelosi,
one
did you have a-
class.
I'm scratching your head.
No. Well, I will ask a question since you stopped me. So I have a 2460 square foot house. Councilmember Largo has a 5,000 square foot lot.
Very big. Are you like, you're going after me like Osborne's garage?
So, as far as impervious area, I will never pay as much as she's gonna pay. Correct?
Well, the residential class generally is one ESU. So if you're residential customers, it would be one.
It would be condensed.
The non-single family is where you start getting, where you have large parking lots, et cetera, that would be now into a more of a multi-ESU rate.
Okay. Where it isn't now?
It is now, but it also provides credits. So we're kind of eliminating the credits and kind of just trying to simplify the process to say the credits did its job when it was implemented and was trying to accomplish certain things.
That's good.
Councilmember West.
Some of us that have single units have swamps in front of our houses that are retention whatevers. And I like the idea of condensing it because how we manage our surface water or storm water, really the whole community benefits from, and the whole community needs to deal with the problem. And so condensing it, I like that idea, so that Bill's house, who's smaller than mine, will get the benefit of the surface area wetlands that I have in front of my house.
Play nice, children.
So a couple other quick things there on this particular rate is that we would grandfather existing non-single family customers until redevelopment occurs. And so right now, again, until we get to that one ESU rate in 2023, you'd still have those rate classes. Any new customer would come in at the one ESU rate, so we wouldn't put them in a credit category. They'd go into the one ESU rate. So we kind of have to go, how do we get from today versus that particular point? So you'd have to do a little bit of grandfathering. A little bit complex in terms of, you know, implementation and trying to get there.
Councilmember Holman.
Since you grandfather existing non-single family customers until redevelopment or change of ownership, but I take it the grandfather clause would expire in 2023?
And it probably might be a little easier to see once we get to the tables on the next slides. The grandfather one's on option 2, but again, here what we're trying to show is option 1, then that first cost of service rates. You can see each of your customer classes still stays in terms of the level of detail that you have. Because we have the overall average of 1.7%, and there are cost of service differentials between classes that we have to, again, try to reconcile and rebalance that revenue. You can see there are different rate impacts depending on what customer class you're actually defined as. And so there's single family would actually be going down. So also non-single family per ESU with the one ESU, but the credits, those who are getting more credits today, you can see those have the impacts of the 10 to 20% range.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
So Angie and probably Shelley, looking back at the ESU rate, which is the most common rate structured by other utilities. So have we ever been on an ESU rate, or have we always been on the cost of service rate? And if so, when was that established?
Formation, did we start kind of forming, did we start the utility, probably as with just all these.
Oh, back in the, when the utility began, the storm. Oh, I think, I don't know. I wasn't here during that time. I was here when we went to this method with the detention and the credits. So it was changed from something else, and that was before the low-impact development requirements, that we kind of did our own low-impact development and said, if you do it, we will give you these credits. I would have to go back and check the code.
Okay. Yeah, you can definitely do that. And so then, we'll have Sergey go through that, but this is just really trying to show you from 2019 through 2022, keeping the same rate structure. You're still going to have differential rates in this particular option for this option.
Yeah, and if you want to look at individual class-specific impacts, you can look at page 2 of the rate design impacts worksheet. Here you'll see, I believe, 7 separate tables, one for each class of service. Again, starting at the top with single family and then going down by non-single family class of service. Because there's only one rate for single family, we're only showing one line. Everybody else, you'll see a low comparison. For the low numbers, we're looking at the bottom 10%. We're taking the average of number of ESUs per account for that class of service. For the medium, we're actually taking the average of ESUs for each class. And then for the high, we're taking the average of the top 10%. So you'll see a pretty big range, but you'll notice that on the low end, everybody has several accounts that are at least 1 or 2 ESUs, so a low end, and then it'll vary by class definition for the other ones. Now, one item to point out, to take a look at is on the change. When we do make that structure change, currently you have a base rate and an ESU rate, and we eliminate the base rate and kind of convert to one ESU rate. You'll notice that anybody on a non-single family rate who has only 1 or 2 units, they'll kind of show a small decrease because of that conversion. That only happens once. After the years thereafter is just the average increases on top of that.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Sorry, I'm confused. I'm looking at page 13.
13.
Oh, you're on 12 still?
Yeah, so we can move to 13. And so the 13, you're going to see again where we wanted to show what the overall annual increases are for each of the customer classes, still with the 1.7% overall. But this is the particular option where by 2023, you're getting to that 14.18 for all classes.
So you show an asterisk here, base rate is eliminated. Where's the effective elimination?
So, yeah.
Oh, okay, it's in that ESU, okay.
Right.
Okay, gotcha, thanks, Mayor. Okay, that takes care of my question, thank you.
And so that's really the big difference is that ultimately in this one, you're getting to that 14.18 by the end of the time period, and I think we have some
Yeah,
comparisons.
we have very similar comparisons on page 3. They're exactly the same, except now taking into account the additional year phase-in and slightly different rates. But the structure and the impacts are very similar to the previous page.
Okay. Oh, sorry, you said you change it. So page 14, again, very similar to the sewer utility. We have a bill comparison that shows the various different entities, as well as, what the Auburn, gotta look at that, Auburn goes to 2022 is at 1588, and then the one ESU rate, the 2023 rate, is the 1418. And so we have various, we're currently where you are right now is the 2022. And so you're in kind of the orange bar charts, and with the adjustments that we're talking about discussing, it's possible that that single family rate will come down, and it can be at the 1588 or the 1418, depending on which rate structure option we have. And again, we're just looking at the single family right here. The bill comparisons will actually show you for the non-single family what some of those impacts may be. And so some do need to go up, so there will be some customers that will have an impact on the non-single family.
Right, but the great news is that single family rate goes down, and showing you the rate 4 or 5 years from now, you know, we're still comparing it to utilities that are current 2018 rates. So when you factor in the potential rate increases they might have, that could put the rate at one of the lowest on the comparison. So again, not very often that we look at potential rate reductions.
So looking at this chart, Bellevue at 1178, they have a lot of catching up to do. You guys have an opportunity. That's the way I look at it, so. Thanks.
So then we can move on to the water utility. Now this particular utility, again, just a quick little recap here. We have some of the customer classes that are pretty close to their cost of service in terms of the single family, multifamily, commercial, you know, a little slightly above. But then we do have some such as manufacturing, schools, and irrigation that are below their cost of service. So again, using that same philosophy as we're trying to get those particular customer classes to pay their cost of service, that is what the rate designs are intended to do in terms of that phase, and that we'll be showing you in the next several slides. There's going to be a number of different alternatives that we looked at for the water rate design. And so we'll go through them conceptually, and then we'll show you some of the tables as similar to the sewer and the stormwater. So option one that you'll be seeing is that we keep the existing classes of service, pretty much the exact same rate structure you have today. We're just going to be adjusting for the overall increase that would be needed in terms of option one. Option two, we brought a different concept to the table. Is right now we currently have about 7 customer classes with different rate categories. And so what happens if we condense some of those customer classes? And so kind of putting more of the typical commercial together, so the manufacturing and, you know, the multifamily and the schools, kind of putting them all together into one customer class. And then we'd still keep the single family, we'd have the non-single family, and then we'd have irrigation separate as well. And so that's kind of when we talk about condensed, that's kind of what we're talking about. Still the same thing, is we're not going to have a different meter charge on this particular one. It would be paying the same basic charge that you have today, just condensing the customer classes. Option 3 is now when we begin to start introducing the concept of the meter charge. So the water customer would be paying a base rate depending on what size meter that they have that is servicing their particular property. And so whether it be 3/4 inch meter, 2 inch, 4 inch, you would pay a different rate, monthly rate, in terms of that particular meter size. And then the option 4 is, okay, well, let's take that one step further. What happens if we condense the classes as well as charged a meter charge? Okay, so that's ultimately very different than currently what we're currently doing today. Now, why? We talked about this last time, but why would we charge a different in terms of, you know, why would we implement a meter charge? This is a pretty common method of charging for water service in terms of a meter, based on meter size. And the intent there is really trying to get some equity between the customer classes. So those customers that have larger meters essentially are placing different demands and have the potential to place different demands on your particular system. So we are just, again, trying to make this potentially a little bit more equitable. And then you have to do it. Again, it's just an alternative in terms of what we're trying to do.
Councilmember Wales.
So I thought you paid for water by volume.
Absolutely.
So you would pay, if you got the same volume out of a 1/2 inch line as you got out of a 3/4 inch line, you would pay more with the 3/4 inch line?
It would depend, right, exactly. So if you had a 3/4 inch line, you'd pay a certain rate. And seeing the rates will probably explain it a little bit more in terms of what we're doing.
That doesn't make sense to me.
So the cost of water will stay the same. It's the cost of the fixed costs. So kind of the meter is bigger, there's bigger infrastructure, and there's bigger capacity that's available to you. So there's just some small costs that are slightly greater if you have a bigger meter size.
But you're still going to pay for water.
Right, so the pure cost of water will still remain the same, doesn't matter what size meter you will be.
Makes sense. Once you see the tables, it'll probably be a little easier to see kind of what the rate actually looks like. But it's every customer class will pay based on meter size. They're going to have a kind of a fixed monthly charge by meter size, and then you'll also pay for the amount of water that you use.
When I look at it like a gasoline pump. I've got my car, and when I put the thing in there, I pay for the gallons. Whether it comes in it takes 4 minutes to get 4 gallons, or it takes 8 minutes. But you're saying that the infrastructure to be able to get it in 4 minutes costs more than what it would take for 8 inches.
Yeah, the bigger difference is that you go to the gas station and it's there, and you travel there, versus at each individual home, we need to put the infrastructure to get it to each individual home. So it's like every home has their own independent gas station that needs to be maintained, and somebody might have a bigger gas station than a smaller gas station, which should cost a little bit more. You know, if I have a small gas station and can't get as much capacity out of it, I probably should pay less for that than somebody who has, you know, a gigantic hose outlet.
I have a real problem with that. Didn't we just put in new meter readers?
We put in new meters, yes.
Did we put them all? Oh. What's those new meter readers that we put in? What is the size of those lines?
Well, specifically, we put in the same size meter, the same size meters that was there before. So if you had a 3/4, you got a 3/4. If you had a 1 inch, you got a 1 inch. If you had a 2, you got a 2 inch. So we swapped out the size that you had with the new meter.
So when a business comes in versus a single family, that they'll essentially say, well, how much water delivery do you need? And so a single family customer would require a different amount of water. But let's say we have a manufacturing come in, they would require a different type of service simply because fire protection type of requirements, kind of overall what do you need for service. And so depending on the size that you have, that's really what we're trying to say is there are cost differences because when we plan our system, we need to plan our reservoirs, we need to plan the amount of water, quantity of water supply that we have. Do we have sufficient amount? Do we have appropriate fire protection type of requirements? You know, do we have enough for peak day? So there are just some different differential, when we serve different customers, there are some cost differences that we are just trying to account for in terms of the industry standard methodology.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Largo, my biggest concern is going over 7 CCF because the rate then jumps for me.
What page are you on?
Well, I'm looking at 19, page 19. That's just an example.
Okay, yeah.
But you're looking at the second blocks down there, 2018. So right now I'm paying for block 1, 0 to 7 CCF is $320. But when I kick in the summer sprinkling system, man, I zap up quickly to 7. And then my rates, go up accordingly. And I think that's what you should be thinking about.
I like the idea of where you're paying for the amount that you use.
Yeah.
But and I don't have a problem, let's say, with industry having a 4-inch line and irrigation having a 3-inch line, and we bill all homes as if they're at a 3/4-inch line or something. But I don't think we should bill based on the type of equipment they've had, especially since we've gone through and replaced all those meters already.
So maybe Ingrid wants to chime in here too. I don't know what kind of a size line I have, but
Now I'm concerned.
I do have the new meter, and I love it. It's
So
so
everybody has new meters now.
right.
Residential homes, typically 3/4-inch line.
Okay.
Some of them might be 1-inch lines. But the water service from that meter to the main line to get the water to there, those all differentiate in size depending upon what the needs are. So a commercial area, we have much larger pipes that are necessary to serve that area because there's higher water demand. So what she's trying to get at is there's higher infrastructure costs for us to maintain that system to serve those facilities that take a bigger amount of water, and that is an easy determination through the meter size. It is not so much an impact on the single-family residential because probably 90% of them are 3/4-inch
Okay.
and treated the same. We have a few that might be 1-inch. We have some that have irrigation meters that have 2 services to them. So there'll be some differentiation there, but other than that, it's really more of an impact on the commercial users than the single-family residential users.
Councilmember Wales.
I think that then we should look at we should whether it's a residential one with a 3/4 or an inch, they should be condensed. And then do the uncondensation one for municipalities, maybe schools, irrigation, or whatever.
So
What
that's
do you
getting
think?
into a much more complex system, and we were trying to simplify the system a little bit in what we were
See, I thought
doing, so-
I thought condensation, when you collapse categories, makes it easier. All single residents, you're gonna pretend like they have 3/4.
Yes, but not all of them do have 3/4, some of them have more. So that's where you have the difference between the two options of looking at whether we charge meters. So
Yeah.
so option 2 is that condensed without a meter charge. And option 4 is condensed with the meter charge. So I think as they go through the
Okay,
actual
great.
specific rates, that might help you understand a little bit
Great.
more what those differences are between the rate classes.
Thank you,
Yeah, there's
thank
some-
you,
Billing complexities.
thank you.
For sure, for sure. And so, really quickly, I think we probably jumped ahead, we'll just go really quickly back, and then we'll charge forward.
Yeah, and really conceptually, even though there's 4 options and they overlap, there's 2 really big questions. One question is, do we want to collapse classes or do we want to remain the same? That's the first question that we want to receive some feedback on. And the second question is, do we want to stay with one charge for all meters as we currently do? Or do we want to look into expanding it and having a meter-based rate that varies by meter size? So that kind of keep that in mind as we're going over all the 4 alternatives.
And so, back on page 18 here, this was the no meter size existing classes, and so we still keep all of the customer classes, single family, multifamily, commercial, manufacturing, schools, municipal, irrigation. And if you kind of go from left to right, that kind of shows you that essentially this particular option is going to stay the same. So right now, there's no differentiation between meter size. So you do have a single family rate that's, certain charge per month. Then you also have the same single family rate for everyone except irrigation, so 4804. So no differentiation. And then irrigation is slightly different. And then you're also charged a variable charge in terms of volume charge. Now that does not change in terms of this particular option. We're strictly just, again, trying to get to that 3.4% overall revenue.
We're not restructuring your rates as you currently have right now. We're just keeping them the same. All we're doing is shifting how much we're collecting from fixed and variable.
Now, if you go to the option 2, that's the condensed classes. And so again, same thing, no meter differentiation at this particular time. Again, left to right here, you can see that now in the second kind of table, the multifamily, commercial, and those particular classes now are condensed to the non-single family rate. And so again, there's no meter size. They're going to be charged a certain amount per month, along with a variable charge. Same thing with irrigation, but they have their own charges. And then single family stays the same in terms of that rate structure.
So now might be a good time to take a look at the rate impacts sheet, and the water comparisons start on page 4. Now, a slight modification we made for how we're representing the comparisons. We're actually using charts instead of tables for the water utility, just because there's so many different alternative usage levels by meter size that we could have looked at. So what we did for the water comparison was we actually said, let's take historical customer data that we have on file. Let's actually apply the rates at current levels. Let's apply rates at the proposed levels and summarize the results in these charts. So these charts represent the actual entire class with their actual usage using historical customer information. So, and again, the reason we're focusing on 2019 is because the major structure change happens in 2019. After that is just across the board adjustments. So what you're looking at here, if you're looking at page 4, each individual class, and you'll see that the average increase, again, we had to round, so you'll see that it looks like majority increases are in the 4% range, but the actual weighted average for the single family is summarized in that little bullet note below the table. It's about 3.4, which is consistent to the table that Angie showed you on the previous slide that's currently on the presentation, kind of under option 1. If you're looking at multifamily, it's about 3.1%. Commercial, 1.2%. Manufacturing, slightly higher. Again, following with the cost of service, if you wouldn't mind going back one slide. 9.3% or so on average. Schools are about following that table, 6.8. And municipal, you'll actually see, depending on which usage, tying to the cost of service, the bars actually are green, which shows a decrease for some of the bills on that class of service. And then finally, on page 5, you'll see the irrigation class at about 7.7% average, again, consistent with that table on that chart. So you'll see on page 5 and 6 of this rate impacts, you'll see a similar tables for the condensed no meter size option as well.
So trying to give you an idea of how many customers are impacted in those particular ranges. That's the first two. So we've also provided those options, or those tables for option 3 and 4, which now bring in the meter size differential. And so the PowerPoint slide 20 essentially is now, it looks a little different in terms of if you look at the, again, from left to right. Here, again, here's your existing charges, so those are not by meter size. Now what we'd be moving to is all classes would pay depending on whatever their meter size is. And so regardless of if you're a school or a residential, depending on your meter size, you would get a certain charge per month. Some of those charges you might notice initially are actually below what some customers are currently paying today. So, right now it's about $48.04. In 2019, you really don't get up to that level until you're about at a 4-inch. So some customers will see a decrease in their fixed charges simply because, again, we're trying to get to that meter charge differential. And so that's something that's fairly significant in terms of how much revenue also we're going to be collecting from our fixed charges versus our volume charges.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Wales.
So if I understand it right, Ingrid, when we collect for the meter size differential, that's allowing us to collect kind of some maintenance money that might be required for maintaining the different size lines.
Yeah, so the way the structure is really, it's trying to make it more equitable for what the different customers are, for them paying what they're actually requiring us to put into our infrastructure, into our system to maintain and provide that service to them. So having the meter charge helps kind of differentiate that more clearly than whether they're commercial or manufacturing, because an 8-inch meter, we still have to provide the water to go through an 8-inch meter.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
Does that mean then it becomes categorical money, that extra that you might pay because you have a meter differential? Becomes categorical, and so it would be set aside for those kind of projects, or we just can use it like?
I'll let Shelley answer that one.
We wouldn't be setting that aside.
Okay.
This is an estimated average.
Okay, great, okay, because that could be a nightmare, sorry, that could be a nightmare.
It would be.
And so again, here, meter size differential, but existing classes, so we're keeping the detail of the existing classes with this particular option. Okay, so it's not condensed at this time. This is just really introducing the meter size differential. And then you all still have a different volume rate, depending on what your cost of service targets are trying to get to by the year 2022. Okay. And then the 4 option is now bringing 2 concepts together, the meter charge that we first introduced on option 3, and then now you're condensing. So instead of all of the customer classes here, now you see the non-single family has combined those particular customer classes. Irrigation still stays separate, and single family stays separate with the existing rate structure. And so this is kind of the ultimate of trying to condense, as well as introducing the new concept of meter size.
Councilmember Wales.
So really what you've condensed is the size of the line.
The classes.
Yes, okay, great.
I see Bellevue caught up.
Oh, go ahead. So page 22, and then you can go to your
Oh, it's very consistent.
bill comparisons. You can see they're all of these 4 options for the single family, at least, are pretty tight, in terms of each of the options that we're looking at. So I think, as Sergey had mentioned before, it really comes down to what makes sense for the city and the overall objectives that we're trying to accomplish. Do condensed customer classes make a little bit more sense? And does introduction of a meter size differential make sense? Or no, we're gonna stay with our existing rate structure that we have today, and that's good, let's just get to the cost of service over time. So that's also an option as well. Give you all some time to kind of just let it absorb a little bit. Okay, so we have gone through some of the rate design development that we have been involved in with staff since our last meeting on the 23rd of April. And so as just kind of a quick recap, the sewer utility, we really just had one option, and that one option is your existing rate structure, but just trying to get to cost of service by the 2022. Storm had the second most alternatives with 2, and the big question there being, do we want to get to 1 equivalent service unit rate, or we like our existing rate differentials, recognizing the difference between those particular customers that invested in some retention detention facilities. We're still getting to the cost of service by 2022 in terms of that option, or do we try to, over time, get to 1 ESU by the year 2023 for all customers? The water, again, the big differential there between the 4 that we showed is, do we want to keep the existing rate structure? And again, just really try to focus on getting to cost of service at this time. Do we want to think about condensing some of those customer classes and keeping, again, no meter differential, again, just a base charge and a volume charge? Or do we want to go to condensing as well as implementing a meter size differential for that? And that would be that last option, the condensed classes meter-based rate structure. And so I'm going to pause there and kind of open it up for maybe some discussion in terms of any additional questions, anything that we can help you understand, maybe some of the differentials that are with each of these customer classes, or the, alternatives that we're presenting. Anything resonate with anybody?
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Well, I guess the question first, maybe Shelley, is looking at the 1 ESU charge and then the condensed classes meter-based rate structure. Is there any cost savings for the city in going to a more simple structure versus having something so widespread that it creates more staff time or billing or whatever the case may be?
Yes, there is. And that's where eventually the city would like to get to 1 ESU. Now, whether we get there over the next 4 years or we move in to where then in 4 years we're ready to go to the ESU. But that would be the ultimate goal, to get to the 1 ESU or single family, non-single family.
Yeah.
I just think that anything we can do to simplify the process makes a lot of sense. And in some cases, I guess you might say, is going for it now with the full impact is maybe a little bit more of a hit. But to continue this on for a few years and then finally get there, to me, it's more of, if we're going to do it, let's do it.
Councilmember Wales.
What I like about this, and I even got to the point where I like the condensed classes in the meter-based one, is I think that by condensing the classes, we make it, we streamline it for ourselves. We're not condensing with individual people, we're with the larger consumers. I like the idea of making it easier to compute, and I like the idea of phasing it in and fixing it. So I liked the phase in by 2020 and the ESU charge for 2023 and the condensed classes meter-based rate structure. But we're not voting, but that's kind of what I think is got greater efficiency. I would be interested to know what you and Ingrid think. And I'm sure you were party to this, but I'd be interested in what you have to say.
I think that we're probably in agreement. We have talked about this and consulted with staff that we were thinking to do on the storm option 1 to get to full cost of service by 2022 to alleviate the impact. But then at 2023, it's 1 ESU charge for all classes. And then,
I mean, overall for a storm, I think we want to get to the 1 ESU charge because that is much easier to administer and manage. And the classes that you have right now in storm are really based upon encouraging LID. We now have standards that require LID, so we don't need to encourage it anymore, which is also why we built in kind of the grandfathering to that, so we didn't automatically harm any of our current customers too badly, but give them some time to work into what that change is.
and then on water, it was the existing classes and the meter-based rate structure moving towards a condensed class and meter-based rate in 2023.
When I looked at some of these, we're only talking about $1.
Pennies.
Yeah,
Sorry.
so I mean, it's, as people listen to what we're talking about, there's winners and there's losers, and the losers, in many cases, are only paying another $1, but it's ensuring the integrity and the ease and cutting down our costs on trying to do what we need to do to maintain the quality of.
A big part of the structural change here is more to make it more equal between all the different classes so that folks are paying for what they should be paying for. Probably the one we get the most complaints about is the single-family storm. So, you know, how do we rebalance that? And do we do it right away or do we do it over time so that we make that shift a little bit more palatable to all of our customers?
Councilmember Pelosi, you have a question?
Yeah, I like what Ingrid said, and I like what Shelley said. And even Largo, I like what you said too. But we're all interested in reducing administrative costs. That's the bottom line here. And so that council does not stumble with, I mean, this is massive information. And I always like to have a staff recommendation and rationale for that recommendation. But what I've heard here, it makes sense. It really does. And so this is a good data. Thank you.
Councilmember Holman.
Chair, just so that you can get a feel for the consensus, I would concur with my two colleagues and what we just heard from Shelley and our presenters.
One on storm and three on water.
Councilmember Pelosi.
One last comment that I have, and that is, it always bothers me when our rates do not cover our costs. And this is hitting it right on the head. We have to cover our costs so that we can build a little piggy bank, which was discussed earlier. And so this is good. This is fiduciary legislative work that we're doing. And that's great.
And so then it sounds like we'll come back in August, September is kind of what you're looking to have. Hopefully council will kind of bring the direction that we received this evening, a little bit more streamlined so we can kind of take away some of the other noise. And that will be looking forward towards the August, maybe August, September time period, coming back with those particular direction. And then hopefully, again, the ideal is to have rates adopted January 1st, 2019 in terms of the new rates.
It will, yeah, we'll need the ordinance in place a few months before that, so we have time in utility billing to get the system set up. We were hoping to have them in place by September, have the ordinance in place, because we need some time.
Any other questions? Thank you all. Very good presentation.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. I don't think we get anybody complaining about having their ESU rates lowered.
No.
And one last quick question. We are kind of winding down in terms of, we're winding down on the overall rate study, but we will come back with an updated wholesale rate as well as the Tacoma surcharge. So that's the one last remaining item. We're kind of done with the retail stuff, but we did, as part of the scope of services, contract for an update of the wholesale rate, so that will be coming forward as well. So just wanted to kind of briefly mention that. So thank you, Sergey, for reminding me of that.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Now we'll move to item 3B on the agenda, SR 18 and SR 164 East Auburn access.
All right, give me 1 second here. All right, so we have with us tonight Jeannie Acutanza, who is a consultant working for the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe on what we are calling the SR 164 East Auburn Access. It was also known in the Connecting Washington package as the eastbound off-ramp for SR 18. So she's here tonight. We're going to be starting this summer to do some public meetings and get some feedback from the public, but we wanted the council to understand exactly kind of where we were at with the project and what was going on with that before we went through those public meetings. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeannie.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Ingrid. As you might recall, we were here, I think, last fall, and up to that point, the tribe had been funding our work to move some of the project along. Through that, we've done some data collection and started some traffic analysis and looked through the history of what had been done to date. So we took a little hiatus as the tribe got under contract with WashDOT for these new Connecting Washington funds. And as part of the initial phase, we also looked at what we called a purpose and need. It's a foundational environmental it's foundational to the environmental process. So that's it makes, just like it sounds, it makes it puts out a purpose why we're doing this project, and it's harder than you might think to make it just a perfect statement. So through that process, we changed the name, or the group felt we should change the name, and we have been working across through the state's process for working with partners. So the city has been a strong partner, Metro and other agencies, and WashDOT have been good partners. So I just wanted to take you through what the open house, what the public process would look like as we start it. And as I said, the first thing is that there's a name change. The name change has not gone through the legislature for a formal name change. So in Connecting Washington, it is still called SR 18, eastbound off-ramp, but this is the name that we're hoping to change it to, and the name change has been submitted. Until that name change is formally adopted by the legislature, it will stay this way. And the only reason I bring that up is the website, which is on WashDOT's website, which is kind of foundational to our outreach process, will still have the old name until we get the legislature to change it. Any questions so far? Okay, so thank you for letting us come in today. I just wanted to go over the purpose of the outreach, this first round of outreach, and then talk to you a little bit about some of the notifications and advertising. Ingrid and the city staff have been helping us to better understand what are the right locations to reach out to folks, where we might go to have our first meeting, and what other things we need to do, how we need to get the word out so that's a meaningful outreach. And then I'll take you through some of the boards, the information we want to put out there. So the purpose of the first this open house is, it's really just to introduce the project to the community, especially under Connecting Washington, including the project history and the current process. And then we're going to review and gain feedback on this project purpose and need, this foundational statement that we use for environmental and for also defining what the alternatives are. And then build interest in the project. So create a listserv, make sure that we're reaching out as broadly as we can, reach out to all kinds of audiences, transit users, limited English proficient folks, not to be too techy, but as the broadest community we can. So we want to do that as soon as possible, and that's the purpose of the open house. And then what I'm going to take you through right now is just some of the boards, some draft boards. They're not formalized, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what we would be presenting. Other things we would have is like project flyer. We would have an open house forum, but also an online portion of that where we present the similar information to the public so you can participate from your living room. And also we can get feedback from you through comment forms either online or at the meeting. So the overarching, the structure of the meeting would be an introduction to the project, welcoming. There'd be a short presentation at 6 o'clock. The tribe feels that that's a good, that's traditional with them. It's a standard protocol. It's just a more formal way of working with the public. So instead of a traditional open house where there's no presentation, they like a formal presentation. We'd like to make sure that whatever open house materials we provide at the tribe, we provide a similar format here in the city of Auburn. So there would be 2 parallel open house meetings. And then, like I said, we'd present this draft purpose and need. We'd talk about the elements of the environment, go through that project history. There's some existing transportation conditions, so that's part and parcel to this purpose and need. Are we reducing congestion, et cetera? And then talk about the next steps and take some comments. So that's a little bit about that. This is what the purpose and need statement looks like today. It's a lot of negotiation with WashDOT and with FHWA, Federal Highway Administration. Part of our discussion with the Federal Highway Administration was to not move too fast to determine what kind of environmental process we're going to use. So they'd like us to be very meaningful and judicious. This statement is also draft. It will stay draft. So I'll let you look this over, and I apologize for not having handouts. And it's been wordsmithed quite a bit, and it will continue to be wordsmithed. One of the things we'll do for the public meetings is we'll make it more reader-friendly, less techy, but for a little bit more technical audience, we want to make those technical inferences here. So the 2 purposes are basically improves congestion, and we'll prove this through looking at some of the traffic analysis, reduce congestion, what the limits of the project are, from 18 to Dogwood, and then that's the segment we found the most congestion on. We'll have some boards about that at the meeting, and then one of the things that Connecting Washington wants to look at is multimodal, so making sure that we consider all modes of transportation. So that is part and parcel to what we'll do. And regional mobility for people and goods. And then the other is accommodating current and future growth. And that's, this is the edge of the county, but we know that there's a lot of growth happening in East King County. So that's that last statement. Just there's growth in on the reservation at East King County, in Auburn, and in Enumclaw. And you don't have to, by not commenting now, it doesn't mean you tacitly agree with this. So there's lots of opportunities. Mayor?
A question, because Dogwood Street is the most controversial part of this whole thing with the neighborhood. Is there concern about having Dogwood Street as part of what you've got in there as that statement going to confuse the issue and make people think that it's already a done deal, that it's going to come out on Dogwood?
I hope not, and I think that's what that's what this open house is about, is to answer those kinds of questions and really be forthcoming about what kinds of what kinds of things we're looking for as far as solutions. So not using Connecting Washington dollars, we will have to look at the broadest range of solutions, not just a new bypass, not just an interchange, but also improvements to the existing corridor or other locations.
And I understand where you're asking for, and part of the negotiation on what this says has been the coordination with WashDOT and FHWA about what are the limits of the project, which a lot of that is being driven by where are they seeing that congestion. And so the terminus of Dogwood doesn't necessarily mean that we're not necessarily looking beyond that with how that modeling goes. But I understand where the concerns are with Dogwood, and that has been part of the conversations that we have had with the probably 10 different stakeholders at the table.
Councilmember Wales.
So I didn't realize that. I'm glad you brought that up, Mayor. Because what I thought you were talking about is fixing our wonderful 5-lane road that goes from Highway 18 up the hill, Auburn Way South to Dogwood. And I thought, geez, that's already been fixed. Are you talking about putting a ramp off of Highway 18 at someplace at the top of the hill?
That has been talked about in the past, and we'll talk about the history of the project. So
Okay.
we'll talk about that.
So we're not on Auburn Way South. We are maybe someplace else.
We're on SR1. The focus of the project is SR 164, and we have documented the congestion that occurs on 164, and that is the purpose and need of our project. That's the heart of the meat of the matter. So.
Where is 164?
State
That's Auburn Way
Auburn Way South. Apologies.
But part of this process is determining what is the potential improvement to that congestion issue. So it might be a new interchange, it might not.
Okay,
It
great.
might be additional improvements on existing streets, it might be additional improvements at the interchange with Highway 18 that exists today on Auburn Way South. We have to look at all of the options. So this first step with the public is really introducing the project and starting to get their ideas of where do they see some of those fixes should be, so that we haven't made any preconceived notions of where that alignment is or where that connection is or exactly what those improvements are before we've considered what are all of the options that are out there.
It might be a good idea to indicate that SR 164 is Auburn Way
I didn't know that.
South. That would, no
And-
confusion.
And you see the Connecting Washington logo on here because that's where the source of the funds are. But because it's Connecting Washington funds, there are strings attached, and many of those strings are the things that Ingrid just talked about. That we have to be inclusive, that we have to look at all modes, that we have to look at a range of solutions, even if it's like traffic signal improvements or access management or improvements for pedestrian connections. It could be just putting in some networked roadways, alternative routes that are not related to interchanges. So we're looking pretty broadly, and that's just the first step. And that's why we want to go very cautiously through this process.
Councilmember Pelosi.
So, I used to live up there. I lived up there for 30 years, right off of Dogwood. Great area. So, I see that you're going to have a tentative schedule for 25 and 26 of June. Are you good? So, and you did mention other meetings for the public.
So the first round would be the first couple of meetings here. Right now, they were tentatively scheduled for the end of June. We're probably going to be looking at early July because we want to make sure that we get proper notice out and proper accommodations set. But the intent of those is that you have one that is located within the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe Reservation area, and one that's located centrally within Auburn, so that we can try to make sure that everybody has a chance to come in and give us some feedback and input on the project.
Because we will not have any recommendations where that spur coming off of 18 would be.
We are probably a year or more away from that point.
Exactly.
Just to make it clear, there's no decisions on what those options are yet or what the final option is, and it's probably a good year-long process with WashDOT and FHWA to get to that.
And Ingrid, what you just said about a year down the road, I think that should be communicated in your first notice so that people don't get all, oh my God,
Would that be classified as like an alternate, like 164 alternate, or the bypass?
Well, I mean, it would be potentially a new interchange to Highway 18, right? And so there's a whole nother process to go through with WashDOT and
Sure.
FHWA to justify a new interchange. But whether that's a public road, or if they were to do a connection like that, whether that's a city road, a state road, all of that is still, again, part of what has to be analyzed as you go through the options analysis. We're not there yet. Way back at step one.
No, we're thinking ahead.
And we're trying to, we're trying to make sure that the process we're going through is thorough and broad and can meet a range of needs. So as far as, thinking forward, and being forward-thinking about what kind of environmental document we might have to do, thinking forward about if there is some kind of interchange process, we want to make sure that we've done all the footwork as we work with people like Federal Highway Administration, if it's a NEPA environmental document, those kinds of things.
And I believe we should do that. Councilmember Wales.
Well, I think that there's a lot of interest in this, and there's a lot of concern from the tribe and from some of the neighbors up there, and for the rest of us who sometimes get bogged down in what's going on. But we can fix that until we're blue in the face, and if we don't do anything significant from hemlock and fir on, we're just creating another bottleneck, aren't we?
So that's part of, again, what the analysis needs to look at. So whether it is, again, a new interchange connecting somewhere on Auburn Way, or whether it is other improvements or other roadway connections to try to pull some of that traffic off of Auburn Way, because a lot of it depends upon where are they trying to go to. One of our biggest constraints on Auburn Way South right now is the M Street intersection, because you have so much traffic on M and on Auburn Way that are intersecting. And so that's a big piece of it, is how do we move that traffic? Is there a way to address that traffic congestion in a different way than just another interchange or another connection? So the interchange is part of this, but it's not the only thing that's being looked at in the process.
I think that you should be sure and share that, because that could solve a lot of significant things.
And I think that's been made clear to the team. And I think your friends at WashDOT and the other agencies, Metro, others, are wanting to keep the limits broad for that reason. So some of the things we'll talk about is making sure, like I said, we have the skids greased for an environmental process. The potential elements of the environment are here, and we want to get people's feedback on, are these the right elements of the environment? One of the comments, I'll just point out farmland, for example. There is some protected farmland if we looked at, for example, improved access at the Auburn Black Diamond Road interchange today. So, and that has some specific protections that we want to be cognizant of. We don't want to go down the road and find a solution and then find out later that there's one little, bugaboo in it, for a technical term. Okay, so these are the potential elements of the environment. The other thing we'll talk about is the types of environmental documents. FHWA is trying, to be more efficient with their environmental processes. So they're being criticized for long 5-year environmental impact statements that take years and years to get through alternatives analysis, evaluation of the environment. So they too are pushing toward more efficiency. If they don't see big controversy, if they don't see a lot of alternatives, if they don't see big impacts, they will push to the right, which is a categorical exclusion. It's a shorter process. The middle process is an environmental assessment, and you can see that they range in time. And then a full-blown environmental impact statement would be more broad. It would and obviously take longer, cost more, etc. So we'll talk about that at the workshop. Part of it will go back through history, because You guys have lived here, you know, there's a lot of people who remember this project and how it's evolved over time. So we'll bring some of that back just so people don't think we've forgotten it. There were corridor studies in 2004. WashDOT, the City of Auburn, and Muckleshoot worked together, and they've had some ideas. We, you know, we'll adjust some of this, but we'll just talk about the background and where some of these projects are. These corridor bypass studies were developed back in the day, and we'll, you know, show some of these because people just remember them. It doesn't mean that that's the solution for, you know, that just means that somebody's looked at it, and it might be why we look at it again. And these have been even developed a little bit further. Other projects, though, M Street, when they put in M Street, they looked at a grid there and how to provide better connectivity in this undeveloped space, and, you know, provide alternatives. We'll have a couple of, we'll have a lot of traffic data that tells us, you know, shows you where the congestion is and some of the tools, and we want from the traffic and transportation information, we want to show it to you, and we want to make sure that it rings true to you. Make sure that, you know, you don't say that's totally wrong, because this is the basis for our transportation analysis into the future. So we want to have confidence that it's reflecting what we see in the ground today. So we'll have a little bit more about traffic. We'll talk about connecting Washington partners and what the requirements of that are. Some of the other requirements of that are that it be multimodal, definitely be multimodal. These funds are also managed within WashDOT, so you have to report often about your progress on them, and they're very prescriptive in the process that they put you through and want you to use, especially like working with your, you know, partners. And then, you know, if the thing about Connecting Washington is that there are some set funds that they've established for construction, and if there was an investment, we would show how that investment could be implemented over time. Doesn't mean we know what the solution is. Doesn't mean we even know, you know, if we could get the approvals in time. But it just Connecting Washington is very committed to the timeframes, the bienniums that they want these investments to be deployed. And then in key messages, you know, we just want to make sure the public knows that we want to hear from them, and that their comments, suggestions, questions will help shape the project. So we want to make sure that we're clear about that. The project's taking a new approach. While all of that history is history, we're going to move ahead with this new approach, offer a whole, fully integrated solution to meet the needs of the community. So that's part and parcel to all Connecting Washington projects. And then a preferred alternative may be more than one thing. It could be intersection improvements here and a new connection over there. So, you know, there is no preconceived notion of what the solution could be. And then looking at complete solution to reduce congestion. So that it has to meet the purpose and need. That's why we call it purpose and need. And we'll have a comment forum, like I mentioned, and that's it. We hope to have this first open house soon, in the early summer, and then as we start to look at alternatives and solutions, we'll have another meeting in the fall. And in the fall, we'd hope to have also some better ideas on what that environmental process looks like, and and other steps that to move the project forward. Any questions?
Would it be possible to get a copy of this
Absolutely.
presentation?
Yeah.
We have a couple of council members that are out, and I think it would be good that they see this as well.
My apologies.
Especially one of them that'll be living in that area where it might come together.
Yeah, and my apologies for not providing this. And don't expect to see exactly these at the open house. It'll evolve over time. We have a lot of feedback from
revisions before we're through with this one.
Yeah, and we have to go through quite a bit of revisions from the state, and the tribe, and the city of Auburn. So we're all partners.
Don't envy the challenge.
I'm lucky to have good people to work with. So
good.
Yeah, at the city, of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything
Thank you.
else?
Okay, moving to item 3C, 2019 to 2024 Transportation Improvement Plan Annual Update. Sir James.
Yes, so we have a map and a memo, also hand out to you. And so I'll start off with that. So the memo that's coming around to you has to do with the question that came up in the last discussion on this topic on 4th Street Southeast. So we told you at the last meeting that we would come back with what the estimated costs are for 4th Street Southeast. And it's quite a long memo, so I'm not expecting you to all read it right at this moment, but I want to summarize kind of what's in there, and probably the easiest way to do that would be to look at the table 1 that's included in that memo that's coming around to you now. So the estimated cost for 4th Street Southeast, including all the utility work necessary to rebuild that roadway, is about $4.6 million. It's about 1.2 lane miles to get done for that. 1.2 lane miles.
Oh, it's in here.
Yeah, so.
You've got it in the memo.
Yeah, it's all in the, all that I'm gonna talk about is in the memo, so.
Picking up from, okay.
2.4 million of that is roadway work that would need to come from the 105 Arterial Preservation Fund. 2.2 million of that is utility work that would need to come from water, sewer, and storm. So what we wanted to show, and the reason we did this table, is we wanted to show kind of what are the programmed and planned projects in the arterial preservation program for the next 5 years, so 2018 through 2022, and kind of what's already committed. So we have several grants that we've already received grant funds for preservation that actually take us through 2020. So that's our A Street, Southeast, 272nd, 15th Street, Auburn Way North. Those are all already funded by grants with at least 50% of the funding for those projects coming from those grants. So if we wanted to try to do 4th Street, because we're talking about 2.4 million in 105 funds, and we have on average, I believe it's 1.7 to 1.9 in 105 funds a year. So we can't even use one full year of 105 funds to do 4th Street. So the only way to do that within the next 3 years would be to basically give back grant funds and not do some of the other preservation projects, which is not what we as staff are recommending, but we wanted to explain this to you. In addition, so this year for 2021 and 2022, we've applied for 3 other grants for preservation projects, again, because these roads will actually score potentially for those grant funds. We will hear later this summer as to whether or not we are successful on those grant requests. So the problem is that as you go out through 2022, if we are actually successful with those grants, there isn't enough money in the 105 fund to fund that 2.4 million unless we either, again, give back current grants or decline future grants that we might be getting. And so that's part of the problem that we struggle with the 105 fund, because it is only 1.7 to 1.9, and roads like 4th Street, 2nd Street, D Street Northeast is another one that also needs to be done. Those are all arterial or collector roads that need reconstruction. So it's going to take time, just like it did for B Street Northwest, for us to build up the funds to be able to actually do that work. In addition, because of the amount of utility work on this, the other thing would also be the concern for the water fund. So you saw in our water rates that we need to do some increase to our water rates for the water fund. Some of that is because of the R&R that we need to do related to street projects. And so if we continue to increase that, then we either need to defer other water projects that are necessary to do this roadway, or we need to defer the street projects that have other water work associated with them. Is everybody kind of following? It's a lot of information, I know, to go through.
Councilmember Wales.
When you look at the map, what do the red circles mean?
They're typically intersection improvements, so it's
Not roundabouts.
Not, well,
Not necessarily.
not necessarily.
They could be.
I don't believe any of those on there are, well, there might be 1 or 2 that might potentially be roundabouts.
Is there one on 320th?
I-7 is a roundabout.
I-7 is a roundabout, yeah. So, but those are typically spot intersection improvements, whether that's signal, roundabout, some other improvement, but those are just at that location.
So the only roundabout on this map is the one, I-7?
Correct.
Seems like a funny location for one. What's going on there, anything? Is that by Wesley Homes or by?
So,
It's a little further east than Wesley Homes.
yeah, and this is, a roundabout at that location is more about safety.
Yeah.
And improving safety at that intersection. We also have the crest of the hill very close to that on 320th. So that also plays into what we do at that intersection.
Good, the rest of the circles aren't roundabouts, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Hey, thanks for putting together this succinct paper. One of the things I've been thinking about since our last meeting, you know, we've done some great work in the city on patching. We could take care of a lot of folks' itch if we patch the bad ones. There's about, I don't know, when I drove there last time I counted, there's about 10 spots that some are not so bad, some are more than bad, and some are worse. Couldn't we patch some of those worst ones? There might be 3 or 4 of them.
So I can have M&O take a look at that. Part of the problem you have is if you actually look at closely at the pavement, what you'll see is that most of the pavement, even beyond what you see as the rut or the dip that you're dealing with, is the pavement is actually alligator well beyond that. So for us to cut out the patch area and patch it back up against something that's going to stay and not just then become another place that the asphalt pops out from.
I'm looking at patchwork as temporary. That's the way I'm looking at it in my head. Temporary meaning 10 years, 8 to 10 years.
6 months is what I'm thinking.
I mean, but anything to make that a more usable road. Rather than going down and repairing, you know, taking it down 12, 18 inches. What is a patch depth?
So it depends upon what the issue is at the location. So most of the issues that you see down 4th Street are subgrades, so we don't have structure below the pavement to actually, so even if we patched it, you're gonna get that same dip right back again because there's nothing underneath it to hold it. Because we've lost the structural stability of the ground below it.
But haven't we done some patchwork on M Street years ago?
So it depends upon what the issue is at each location and how far the subgrade has been compromised underneath the roadway as to what we can do and how much we can do. We do have a patching program that we do, and we typically go out and do areas where we know we need to do some patches. If there is some decent pavement around where those patches need to be done that we can actually tie into. The problem with 4th Street is if you get out and actually look at it, there's very little that's actually good pavement left for us to be able to connect to have that patch actually survive longer than a few days. So I can have.
But it would be nice if we could look at that. There's only three or four areas that I would think are in the worst case scenario.
I looked at last year and I looked at this winter, and I thought our roads were a lot better than they have been in a long time. Setting aside 4th Street, I mean, that's an animal unto itself. But I know up on 112th, almost as you get to Kent, there's a hole, and you guys do fill it. And I've seen a a lot faster turnaround. And there was one going up 304th, and I see them being patched a lot more aggressively this year than last. It might be fun for us, setting aside 4th Street, of course, if somebody could give us a map and show us where some of these patches are, so that, but I think you've done a lot better job.
Yeah, I don't know that mapping out what M&O has done around the city would actually be that easy to do. I would have to look into, that might be some fairly extensive work because they don't necessarily track it on a map anywhere.
Yeah,
by
they
map.
just drive along and fill.
They go, they get their calls and they go, they fill it, they address it. So we have tracking for customer service requests, but it doesn't necessarily give us location. So that might be some fairly significant work for us to try to map what they have actually done.
Can I talk about guardrails?
Sure, go ahead.
But the we haven't, I know that guardrails, there's only one company that does guardrails. But I hope this summer we can get some of the ones on Kersey, and there's one, they're all over the place they're curled up and off to the side waiting to be repaired.
And many of those already have contract requests out
Okay,
to
good.
the contractor to do.
Thank you.
That is something that maintenance and operations handle.
Okay, thank you very much.
So the other thing, just so as background for this, that you'll see on this chart as well, is we also provided lane miles for each of those projects, so you can see kind of how many lane miles of those arterial roadways we would be getting done with each of them, as well as the average daily traffic, or the ADT that's on there. So you can see how much traffic is actually using each of those roadways. And so that's part of the reason why we choose those roadways to go after grant funds for, is because of the amount of traffic, the current condition of those roadways, and them being in kind of that sweet spot to get funding through those federal programs.
How much how much is the circle, the turnaround or roundabout, I-7 gonna cost?
So as we go into that, I'm actually going to turn that over to James to start going through what is actually on the TIP update, because that information is actually on page 7 of 145 under the additions.
So,
TIP I-7, 1.73 million.
So we could combine that with the other 1.7 million and we could fix 4th Street?
So, no.
no.
Okay, because.
Nice try.
Okay,
Simple answer, no.
okay.
Yeah, the roundabout is, that $1.7 million assumes a significant portion of that will be grant funded. We don't have a lot of city money in that, so, yeah.
So if we are successful in getting that grant, that's one that we've applied for this year. If we're successful in getting that grant, then we'll move forward with the project, but we can't move those grant funds somewhere else.
Have you done a grant request for 4th Street Southeast?
No, we have not. It wouldn't be eligible for preservation funding that we can apply for grants for.
Disaster funding?
We would have to be under a declared disaster to be able to do that. So in your packet, you have a cover memo, which is pretty much the same memo that was presented at the last study session. It discusses the reason that we're going through this process, and then goes through in more detail the amendments to the TIP that are proposed as part of this annual update. So there are a number of projects which are proposed to be deleted, mostly because they've been completed or will be completed by the end of this year. There are a couple that have been removed from the TIP but will remain on the comprehensive transportation plan. It then talks about the change to the numbering convention that we're rolling out as part of this update to simplify the TIP and make it more user-friendly. So instead of having the projects numbered 1 through 70, whatever, and just being in numerical order in the TIP, the new numbering convention actually identifies the type of project and then gives it a number. So they'll be kind of more in chapters, where all of the projects in one chapter will be numbered sequentially. So it'll make it a lot easier to be able to flip through the document and find the project you're looking for. And then it talks about the new projects which are being added to the tip as part of this annual update. And there's a copy of the tip sheet and a map showing the location of each of those new projects at the end of the memo. In your packet, you also have the complete draft tip document, which has some additional information at the beginning and at the end in terms of summary tables for each of the projects in each of the funds, and then the map, which is the last attachment to the tip, which I handed out at the beginning of this presentation. So it's pretty much.
Yeah, nothing, as far as adds
Yeah.
and deletions, nothing has changed from our last discussion 2 weeks ago. What you will see coming forward next Monday is the public hearing for the TIP and then potential action on the TIP by the council. So this is kind of the last chance to go through any questions that council has.
Councilmember Palooza.
Yeah, regarding I-7, and council, I'm looking at page 17. I'm looking at the capital cost funding sources. I see that we're going to request unsecured federal dollars for $290,000 and one for $25,000.
So it's a single grant request that we made this year for the 1.68
Yeah,
million.
to WashDOT.
So the grant request has been submitted to the state
So
for the total grant, unsecured grant amount, the 1.685.
you've lost me. Oh, this one over here, the total. Okay, so you've requested.
Not going to guarantee we're going to get it. We're
No,
hopeful.
no, I understand.
We've submitted for it.
So we've requested 1.685 from the government. I'm curious how engineering came up with 1.73 for the cost of that project.
So.
Do you have your statement of work already laid out? I'm sure you do.
So we have a general scope for the project, and the staff go through and do a cost estimate related to that scope, looking at information we have in our mapping about area that we need, whether we need right-of-way, whether we need, how much area we need to build on. And they'll put an estimated cost together. Because this is so preliminary, there'll be a fairly good contingency added to that cost estimate for what we're doing to try, and also costs for all the soft costs, all the engineering costs, design costs, management costs, will all go into that number.
Does your task, the overall task for the 1.73 million, does it include purchasing private property?
It does. There is a small right-of-way phase that's estimated at $30,000. That's included.
How much?
$30,000.
3,000?
30.
Yeah, 30,000. So you don't have to, just right away then, you don't have to take private property.
Not full parcels, but possibly some frontage areas along the roadway.
Frontage?
Frontage or corners
Some
at the
corners,
intersections.
Yeah.
What we would call partial acquisition.
My other burning question is, I know we discussed this last time about stop signs. What would the cost be to put in 2 stop signs plus mitigating amber flashing lights for the concern that engineering has for the downslope and upslope?
You wouldn't use amber flashing lights at that location. In order to mitigate the issue that we talked about last time, you would be reconstructing the roadway and removing the crest. So you're probably in the millions.
Are we talking about I-7?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
In addition, the first step for any of that would be going through the warrant analysis for a four-way stop.
So, can I continue?
Sure.
So, you're telling me that it will be less costly to do the roundabout rather than stop signs, because you will have to remove the bump in the road, or the, what do you call that?
So, yeah, the crest.
Crest.
So the first issue, again, is we need to go through a warrant analysis to determine whether or not a four-way stop control situation is appropriate at that intersection. Then we would have to look at what are the issues with doing that four-way stop control. One of those will likely be that crest on the roadway, which would require us to rebuild that and that several hundred to 1,000 feet of roadway to fix that potential issue for sight distance.
Well, but the crest is on the west side.
Remember, it's as you approach where that stop sign is, which is on the downhill side, you need to be able to see that soon enough and see any cars that are stopped at that stop sign soon enough
Right.
over that crest to be able to come to a stop before rear-ending somebody or missing that stop sign. And that's the issue that you have there with the current geometry that exists. But as we talked about last time, I don't believe that it would necessarily warrant the four-way stop at that location today.
Well, you've given a little more information to me since that last meeting regarding well, we did talk about the crest a little bit, but not about reconstruction. You said millions, and that was not portrayed at the last meeting that I heard anyway. Okay.
Councilmember Wales.
We have our ad hoc group that's meeting, and you've been looking at different issues, and are we going to get some feedback from you guys prior to a public hearing on this?
Not prior to the public hearing, no.
Okay.
We had to cancel our meeting that was scheduled for last week, and we're meeting again, I believe, on July 3rd now.
Okay.
But what we do is we go through each individual tip in detail. And as we complete our review, and also based on the recommendations from Ingrid and James, we will be bringing back some information to the council on whether or not we will be recommending or modifying certain projects within the tip. And as been mentioned many, many times, most of it depends upon the grant funding. So we're kind of limited to what we can do, but I think a lot of this is also bringing back much more awareness, just like in the request that was made of changing the designation of the tip to the programs rather than all the numbers. So to make it, again, more user-friendly, but to continue to provide more data, more detail, more information, including cost estimates and such, that can provide us with better decision-making.
I really like the new numbering, because it gets me where I need to be. I just think it would be do we have 4th Street on here, on the tip as unfunded, so that it at least makes the wish list to?
So it's not that it's not on our wish list. So it's part of the arterial street preservation program, which the way that project is funded on here, until we actually have a specific project started or grant funds for it, it is a program budget. So it's a program budget for each year at 1.7 or 1.9 million, whatever we have in potential revenue. As we get grant funds, we create projects out of those funds for those grant-funded projects, and then what's remaining becomes whatever goes into our patching and overlay project for the year if we have enough funds to do that. So we haven't necessarily, so there's 4th Street, there's 2nd Street, there's D Street, there's numerous arterial projects where reconstruction is needed on an arterial roadway, 15th Street Northwest, west of West Valley Highway. There's a lot of different locations. So if you start picking only one and putting it on that list, I think that limits our ability as we look at the funds that we have every year outside of what we're doing with grant funds and grant commitments. We're looking at how can we best spend those dollars to extend the life of all of the streets, as well as if we have underruns coming in on projects and we have ending fund balance that maybe we had more revenue come in than we expected, we might be setting that aside like we did for B Street for doing another reconstruction and looking at what is the best street to do that with. Because we also have to balance.
Councilmember DeCoursey and then Councilmember Wales.
So just, Ingrid, the PCI for 4th Street Southeast is 33 right now. The PCI for B Street Northwest was 0.
It was 1.
It was 1.
Wasn't quite 0.
Don't
but
look at the 0, go to 1.
Zero would be a disaster.
How long did it take us to actually program and get to the point of construction on B Street?
It took us about 3 years of pulling underruns from other projects and using using 1 year's full program, I think, in order to fund B Street.
So in this process, we have commitments already made, grant funding in place or potentially in place, which we don't want to give up grant money, of course.
You're doubling your money with those grants, so
Well, I agree.
we don't want to necessarily give those away.
No, and I'm not suggesting that we do. I guess what I'm suggesting is that, just like we did with B Street, and you've given us a pretty good estimate here of what we think the cost may be for 4th, is where we look at it from the standpoint beyond what's already in place for the current grants, and look at how we can move into 4th Street as soon as we can.
So
And I understand the complexity with that.
Yeah, and so the very last page of the memo is basically the summary of the financial constraints for the 105 fund is highlighted in there, and you can see that right now with the TIP, first 3 years are constrained, last 3 years are not, and in the last 3 years, we go into the negative today. So if you add in 4th Street to that as a separate project, it's going to go 2.4 million more negative. As well as we also then need to, if we include that in our capital facility planning, I need to also account for those utilities, which means that I may be deferring other projects in those utility funds when we have a project that we may not really be able to fund the street portion of.
Just as- can do a
No,
call.
please,
Okay,
please,
right.
no, you're good. You're doing the same train of thought.
It's, we're going to see this continue on for years, we know that. We've had issues over the years. I mean, infrastructure is deteriorating all across this nation, we've talked about that so many times, and there's never enough money to fix anything. So I think one of the things that we as a council continuously need to do, and part of our ad hoc can help, I guess, massage us through the process, is look at our budget and look at how we define what's in that preservation fund. I'm not saying we can pull monies out of anywhere and put it in there, but I think the challenge is on us rather than on you, of looking at how we can potentially increase the arterial preservation fund to a point where we can perhaps address some of these issues sooner than later. We could be here 6 or 7 years from now and still be talking about 4th Street, or some could be here at that time, others, most of us
And we
won't be.
probably will be talking about 4th or 2nd or D. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's gonna be
the reality
continuous.
is the Arterial Street Preservation Fund at its current funding level doesn't have enough money to do the full rebuilds that are necessary until we are able to build up several years of revenue within there to do that. At the same time, you want to keep the roadway network for all of the other roads operating as best we can. And those other roads where we're doing the overlays are the ones where you have the majority of the traffic on the arterial system. So those are also the roads that are going to degrade even faster. So even though we might want to do 4th Street, the reality is at 6,300 vehicles a day, it's not going to degrade as fast as Auburn Way is at 30,000 vehicles a day, right? So if we miss the opportunities to take care of those roadways that are in fair condition and just need an overlay to do a rebuild on 4th Street, we may then be turning around and doing a rebuild on Auburn Way, and that is a significant increase in cost. So it's a balancing act on how do we best spend those dollars to maximize the benefit for the overall system.
Right. Go ahead.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'll go back. Go ahead.
That doesn't mean that 4th Street's not important, it's just we have to make some difficult
I
decisions.
think we just don't want to lose visibility of it, and I think we really want to just maybe have a placeholder or something so that, I'm sure it's going to be visible to the current council, but, you know.
I think that you've put a finger on what I'm trying to say, because I remember back in the old days when Bill Pelosa had a problem with B Street, Isn't B Street over there where I get my hair done, and it was all whatever, and you said something, and Ingrid went out and got it totally taken care of?
Yeah,
Remember
no
that?
no cracks.
I know, I mean, you just took care of it, can't you do that?
She
We
told
wanna-
me there'd be cracks in 3
It's
weeks.
really important to us that it not be lost. But we have to use what we've got for revenues wisely, and we don't want to turn anything down. But if you could put it someplace,
It's in the forefront of our minds every day on all
Good.
of our arterial systems, because again, this is not the only one that we have that needs to be rebuilt. It's a struggle to figure out where can we fund it and how can we do it, and also, what's the impact on the utilities that we also need to do at the same time. You know, sewer can probably handle it, but water, it means we're probably impacting either other water projects or we're increasing rates even more in order to generate more capital revenue to do that.
and it is a gateway for us. Some of us see it as kind of a gateway. Thank you.
Member DeCoursey.
So perhaps as we get back into our ad hoc reviews, and I know some of it is in here, some may not be in here, but perhaps it would be helpful if we had the list currently, potential for the next few years, what all the rebuilds would be, not dollar-wise, but where they are. We have, I mean, even on this list here, you know, the highest PCI is 63 on Lakeland Hills Way, which is only 5,300 vehicles per day. So we're not anywhere
so-
close to what we would consider to be a passable road
Yeah.
in the PCI rating anyhow.
Right, so we have the State of Our Streets report that we're currently working on, which will actually give you the mapping showing the conditions of, based on our most recent PCI ratings, conditions for both local streets as well as for the arterial program, to show you graphically where those needs are. We don't necessarily cost those out because I don't have the staff resources to go through and do that, because there's more roads than I think everybody realizes that need rebuild on there still. I mean, we're making good progress, but we're not done yet.
So you're talking about estimating, you may have addressed it before, but do we have an actual estimating software program that we use, or is it more historical information?
It's staff going through and looking at the project and calculating quantities and putting numbers to it, so
It's just like you did with forestry, and I really appreciate the numbers here, but if we could just look at it at a cost per mile, I know you can look at that anyhow, but the cost for whatever. Give us an indication of what the overall magnitude might be for all those rebuilds.
Well, it's the difficulty with that is what is necessary in that rebuild. So 4th Street, as an example, the lane mile cost for that is way different than the lane mile cost for rebuilding, let's say, D Street Northwest, because 4th Street has 2 lanes and then parking areas on either side. So that cost per lane is a lot higher than a cost per lane for D Street, where we have 3 or 4 lanes across there, but there's no parking. So it's basically you're redoing those lane miles. So the cost per lane mile is different than the cost per lane mile for 4th Street. So we can do some generalized numbers, but my concern with that is that it may give you a false sense of what that number really is when we get into the details.
I think the caveat would be that it's just a plug number right now, just for review.
And there'd be some significant staff time to putting that together for the amount of roads that we're talking about.
Mayor Backus.
As Ingrid just said, it's a significant amount of time, and I'd like to remind you all that it is construction season right now, and everyone that would be working on that type of a project is busy working on the roads that are going to be under construction. So this isn't something that's going to be
No,
done.
and I'm not saying we do this immediately, I just, as we move along, as we think about this, perhaps there's a way we can do something with it.
We'll remind you from time to time.
Walk around and go like this. Straight.
Okay. Any other questions?
But I do appreciate you having, you know, look at potential patching.
I will have them look and see. I'm not making any promises
No,
as to what they
of
can
course
do.
not.
but
I
will
just,
have them
you know,
Yeah, you'll do the Pelosa fix.
Now, we have
I'll go down with my jackhammer.
we have one more item on the regular agenda. I would like to ask the council if they would like to take a break.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Say 8 minutes.
8 minutes.
You can get there and back in 8. I know. We're running a little late tonight.